Hi Spring fans, welcome to another installment of Spring Tips. In this installment, we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, something that I wanted to talk about in more depth and more detail for a long time. And indeed, we're not even going to be able to talk about all of it today. I think we're going to have to do a second video, which is a great problem to have. So no problem at all. We're going to talk about Alibaba, in particular, some of the software that they've made available for developers in the sort of ecosystem to use. Let's call us muggles, shall we? Now, if you've ever seen me talk about Spring at any length before, then you know I am quite fond of Alibaba. They do some amazing things with Spring. Alibaba is a large organization in China. It would be illusory, albeit misguided, to kind of liken it to Amazon, because that undersells it, right? Alibaba is a much more interesting organization. They're much more diverse, first of all. So Alibaba has many different companies underneath them. It has been around for more than a decade, since the early 2000s, I think maybe since the 90s, but at least the early 2000s. And in this time, they've become the largest e-commerce engine in Asia, certainly. In terms of the catalog, they're the largest in the world, larger than Amazon, larger than everything. And if they themselves don't dominate in a particular market, then they, as often as not, in Asia especially, have subordinate sort of satellite companies that they've acquired or invested in or started up from whole cloth that do. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, it's very common to use Lazada, for example, in Singapore or Malaysia. And so, and that company is largely controlled now by Alibaba, for example. And Alibaba have a particularly interesting network of companies associated with it. There's a bunch of companies that are part of Alibaba itself. So, for example, Taobao and Alipay and Aliyun, which is the Ali Cloud. All these are Alibaba proper. But then there's Ant Financial, which is not strictly speaking Alibaba, but it's under the same sort of family because of investments from the leadership. And then you've got, like I said, satellite companies like Lazada, which stood on their own by themselves before, but now are part of the Alibaba sort of family. And the range, the things that these companies do is pretty diverse. Alipay is like PayPal, except unlike PayPal, you can use Alipay everywhere. It is everywhere. You can go to a little village, you go to a little hole in the wall restaurant in the village in China, and you can use your phone to pay for the meal, right? Imagine being able to go do that in a place where they don't otherwise have a cash register. They'll still take PayPal. It just doesn't happen, right? Alipay is accepted in a lot of places in the West, right? Because the Chinese, of course, are a burgeoning force, and there's a lot of economy related to that. So Alipay is ubiquitous, unlike anything else. It's more ubiquitous than anything I've seen, certainly in all my travels. And I've been talking about Alibaba and their use cases for Spring for a long time. So you might recall that a few years ago I did this Spring at China Scale, right? This is a blog from 2013 when I spent 3 months in Shanghai, which is an hour's train ride from Hangzhou, where Alibaba are located. And I talk about their use then, Alibaba and Tmall, and so on. And the thing that I think most people might appreciate about Alibaba these days is when they hear about 11/11. So every November 11th, and we're fast nearing that. So obviously, hug ups to all my friends at Alibaba. 11/11 is November 11th. It's Singles Day or Double Sticks Day, and it's a day where they routinely in a single 24-hour period, blow out any sales record you might have heard of. So in 2012, that record was $3 billion in a single 24-hour period. Now, that was a solid at least 6 years ago. So Alibaba 11/11 2017 sales. Let's see what that was, right? TechCrunch. Oh, 25 billion in a single 20. Where did they go? Hey, come back. 25 billion in a single 25 billion in a single 24-hour period. The reason the money isn't so interesting as the scale, right? The scale is what's interesting. Per this article that I wrote, years ago. Why is this? Per this article that I wrote years ago, Taobao, 147 million user visits, purchases of 30 million people, and nearly 100 million paid orders. At midnight, more than 10 million users were concurrently online, transacting, doing sales, right? This isn't just people reading data. This is actually committing data to stores and creating small little contracts with the company, right? That's incredible. I mean, these kinds of numbers just aren't what most people are, I think, I think most people are not aware of these kinds of numbers. That was 6 years ago. The numbers are even more insane now, obviously. And so Alibaba has become kind of interesting. Now, the thing about China, in my humble experience, is that there is an incredibly vibrant open source ecosystem within, but it's for a couple of reasons, it's sort of opaque to those of us in the West that don't read Chinese. And so it's always been useful for me as an exercise to go there, and I speak every year. I spend time with organizations there who are using Spring, and of course Alibaba and Baidu and UU and all these, and Tencent, all these large organizations that dominate the internet in the East, and certainly dominate in general. They're among the largest in the world, if not the largest. They are using Spring, and Alibaba is a good example. Every organization that I can think of in Alibaba is using Spring, and they've been using Spring forever. In some cases, there were gaps in the things that Spring could support or address, and the Alibaba engineering groups would fill those gaps and build on top of it. But they chose to build in Spring because what else are you going to use, right? It's 2005. You want to build something at scale. What's the alternative, right? Spring that's all you got. So they built on Spring, and they plugged in some gaps for things like service registration and discovery and building services, and they even have frameworks that emerged internally. And a lot of these different organizations started contemporaneously. They started at the same time, solving the same problem, independent of each other, and they all arrived at Spring plus some seasonings, if you will. So they've got different solutions sometimes within the same large, massive organization, and one of them is Double, and I hope to be able to revisit the topic of Double in another video. Actually, I will definitely. It's on the list, right? It's one of those things I wanted to cover in this video, but it's just so massive a discussion that it's worth revisiting. But suffice it to say, Double now built on Spring Boot and Spring Cloud, right? So Double is even more interesting. Today, my friends, we're going to confine ourselves to Spring Cloud Alibaba. So you may know that we have integrations with different cloud players and with different, Spring, with cloudy sort of infrastructure. Spring Cloud has, in the incubator, we have Spring Cloud Alibaba, Spring Cloud Azure, Spring Cloud AWS, Spring Cloud GCP, and I've done videos on these, right? So today we're going to look at Spring Cloud Alibaba. Now, Spring Cloud Alibaba is actually it's two-tiered. So if you look at Spring Cloud GCP, for example, Spring Cloud GCP serves GCP, Google Cloud Platform. And there is nothing really of use in Spring Cloud GCP if you're not planning on using Google Cloud, right? That makes sense. Alibaba, on the other hand, have a really good open source footprint. There's a lot of good stuff you can use that requires absolutely nothing of their platform. You don't have to use it. You can just run it in your local machine, and it works just fine. And the Spring Cloud integration connects us to those things. Now, we're going to talk about Nacos and Sentinel today. One thing that we're not going to talk about today, because it's just not quite there, is Apache RocketMQ. And RocketMQ is the open source messaging platform that Alibaba built up years ago, right? This serves their use cases. It still serves their scale and their use cases, and it does so at forget about web scale, China scale, right? This is actually a project that I think it would be very interesting to look at. And so there is, as I understand it now, work being done to make this a better supported citizen of the Spring Cloud Alibaba project, and in that vein to provide Spring integration and Spring Cloud Stream bindings and so on. But in the meantime, we will focus on these things that we can use today, namely Sentinel and Nacos. And then we'll look at Spring Cloud Aliyun or Ali Cloud, right? This is the cloud platform. And you'll see that it's just as with the other Spring Cloud integrations, trivial to take your Spring application to the cloud, to take advantage of services running in those cloud platforms. And so my services, my application, I'm going to run everything on my local machine. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a strident believer in using the simplest thing that can possibly work to run my applications today. I don't want to I don't want to have to deal with a wall of YAML files, so I tend to use something like Cloud Foundry. Cloud Foundry just lets me give it a jar, I can run it, and then on top of that, I run whatever I want. So you can run Cloud Foundry anywhere, right? But there are certain services in different regions of the world, in different clouds, that are compelling. And so, for example, if you're in Asia, and if you're in China in particular, two very popular options are Microsoft's got a sort of white label Azure thing that isn't quite Azure, but it's managed by a local Chinese partner for reasons. And that's compelling. It's most of Microsoft Azure, but in China, right? Which is, it can be very, very valuable if you're trying to get into that market. And then, of course, there's AliCloud, right? And so we're going to focus on AliCloud today. Let's build a new application, a regular Spring Boot application called Bootiful Alibaba. We're going to use the web support. We're going to use Lombok. We're going to use the cloud starter, right? I want the starter, not because I want, let's see, cloud bootstrap. There we go. We don't want anything from Spring Cloud per se, except for the dependency management and the basic core common dependencies. Okay. We'll have to, at the moment, we'll have to add the checkboxes for Alibaba manually. At the moment, we've already got, we've got support for AWS, for Pivotal Cloud Foundry, for GCP, for Microsoft Azure, and so on. So we've got the big four there already, and Alibaba, I hope, is going to join the release train in 2019. So here we go. We've got this this very simple application. We're going to use all the basics. It doesn't really matter. We'll hit generate, and in my downloads directory, you see I've got this file. I'll open that up in my IDE. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add the dependencies that we need to be able to work with Spring Cloud Alibaba. Okay, we'll just get that out of the way right now. Normally, this would have been done by the time I launched my IDE because we would have had checkboxes. But again, as I say, those just aren't there quite yet. And that's for better or for worse. This is a good opportunity for those of you who are just trying this stuff out. If you want to feedback, if you want to, let us know how you feel, sound off, please go to github.com, Spring Cloud Incubator, and then you'll see Spring Cloud Alibaba. And there we are all the more interested in your feedback, please. So here we go. Let's add a few dependencies, the first of which is going to be our Maven Bill of Materials dependency. So I'll just copy and paste this, and we'll gut the bits that we don't need from this. So Alibaba, we'll say Spring Cloud Alibaba dependencies, and we want a version 0.2.0.release. All right. There we are. Okay, so there's that. Now, once we add this, we're going to add some dependencies here. So let's see. These will be OSS, SCA, SCAC, okay? So here, dependency, Spring Cloud and then we want Spring Cloud Alibaba. We want the dependencies for Nacos configuration, config, and we don't need the version, certainly. It's the whole point of adding that bill of materials Maven dependency is to avoid just that requirement. So Nacos discovery, and we want Sentinel, right? And finally, AliCloud OSS. Okay. All right, so there we go. We've got a number of different dependencies in there. OSS stands for Object Storage System. Okay, so we'll come back to that all in a bit. Actually, for now, since we don't need that yet, and we don't have it configured, we're going to comment out that stuff right now. I think we might just comment out all of it and just see what we can gradually reintroduce. All right, so now those dependencies, I've added those dependencies I've added those dependencies, and they work reliably over Maven Central. That said, if you're in a region of the world where Maven Central isn't as fast as you'd like it, if you're in a region where you might be using Ali Cloud and access to public repositories like Maven Central is slower than perhaps you'd like it, you might use your own custom settings.xml file. Okay, so you would put the settings.xml file in your Maven M2 repository, and the URL that you would use, I'll let you configure out the rest. You have to make this a mirror of your central. You just say mirror of and then central, and the URL for Alibaba's Maven repository is the following. Okay, public. There we go. So that's that URL. If you create a Maven, if you create a settings.xml, and then make it a mirror of this one, http maven.aliun.com/nexus/content/groups/public, you'll get a fast connection. Could be useful, but like I said, Maven Central works fine for me where I sit right now in Singapore, for example. So very good. Now we have an application. We're going to build an application, and our application we're going to take advantage first of Sentinel. Now Sentinel is a thing that grew out of Alibaba's insane scale requirements, right? I told you those numbers before. As you can imagine, having the ability to centrally configure and protect services is invaluable, and Sentinel is the engine of that protection. Sentinel keeps watch over flows of data into services and limits it. It can throttle it. It can do flow control rules. It can do all sorts of interesting things. I have downloaded Sentinel, and Sentinel. You can download Sentinel as well, by the way. GitHub.com. Well, actually, GitHub.com, Alibaba Sentinel. Okay, and when you go here, you'll see the releases directory or item, and there you'll be given 2 downloads: Sentinel Dashboard 130EN. That's the English, internationalized version of the Sentinel project, and here's the regular sort of by default Chinese, multiple dialects, multiple sort of encodings, but Chinese language Sentinel Dashboard. Now you'll see that the English one is not quite perfect yet. They're changing. I mean, literally, they're fixing things every day, all the time. They're very responsive. This release came out 10 days ago, and so the English one, it's not that the translations aren't great. It's that some buttons just haven't been translated yet, right? And so that's just, if you see it, I've already filed a few issues. They're fixing it as fast as they can, and they're doing a great job. So I'm always grateful for that. Okay, so you can download that, get it going on your local machine, and the way I'm going to start it up is I'm going to run this little script I wrote called, it just says set the server port to 8888. And by the way, it's a Spring Boot app, of course. So Java-jar Sentinel Dashboard. I set it to 8888 because 8888 is 8888. 3 8s and 4 8s are good luck, right? So I figured why not? It's a good luck number in China. So there we go. We'll hit run. Let's see what we got. There we go. So it's up and running on port 8888. We can go here, localhost. All right. And when we go there, we can see that there's nothing registered in application yet, nothing to manage yet. So we really need to build an application that we can then connect to this. And in order to do that, we need to, in our code, configure our connection to Sentinel. Okay. So the way you do that is you set the dashboard location. So application.properties, Sentinel. I guess we need to add in the dependencies, certainly. Alrighty. Dashboard. Okay. So we'll just say localhost 8888. There you go. And you could also put this stuff. I'm going to put a lot of stuff in bootstrap.properties, which viewers will know is the place where Spring Cloud looks for things that are then used to resolve things needed in the bootstrap process of Spring Cloud itself. So for things like service registration and discovery, etc., configuration values, these things that are then used to resolve the rest of the configuration, for example. So I'm going to put as much as I can here. I'm not sure, strictly speaking, whether this needs to be there or not, but why not, right? And I'm going to give this a name. It's going to be called Bootiful Alibaba. All right, there we are. There's my application. Sentinel. Okay, and there's our configuration name. And now in our application, we're going to create an endpoint that will then use Sentinel to protect. So let's use Sentinel first. First, let's create an endpoint that we can protect in code. Actually, we're going to try this a couple of different ways. We're going to configure a simple REST controller. So greetings REST controller. All right, get mapping. And we're gonna configure the protection for this endpoint in code. So I'll call it code. And you know what? Time for a little bit of Chinese. We're gonna say Nonghao. That's Shanghainese. It's Mandarin basically, but it's slightly different dialect for hello. And then we'll do one for the dashboard, and we'll look at that in a second. And we'll protect this one with the dashboard in a second. Dashboard. And there, we'll say, Ni hao. That's more mainstream sort of Mandarin, okay? Okay, so we've got now a REST endpoint. Now, by default, everything in your application is protected if you're using Sentinel, okay? So we have a web application that's protected already. These resources correspond to endpoints that Sentinel is aware of. We haven't configured any rules for them, but that doesn't mean that Sentinel is not aware of them. We can configure rules manually in code, so let's do that here. We can say Sentinel code configuration and create a bean that gets invoked when the application is up and running. It's initializing it. So I'll do public void configure Sentinel throws exception. All right. And we'll do add configuration. And here, we're going to write some code. I'm going to say flow rule. fr equals new flow rule. And what we want to do is we want to create a rule that will protect our resource. And that resource is, as I say, code. And the rule will have, we're going to allow, I need to be able to overwhelm this endpoint with my browser. So I'm going to set it to a nonsensically, ridiculously low number, like 2, okay? But obviously in a real production system, one would hope that you'd handle a good deal more than that. I always set it to whenever I do a Spring Cloud Gateway and the circuit breaker, the rate limiter, I also show like 5 per second or something like that. So, this is just problems of doing demos, I suppose. And then set the grade, and the grade is the thing that we're going to use to determine what triggers the protection, right? So that flow grade QPS, so that's queries per second. Okay, and then we want to say, I want to limit this app, basically. That's the message. I'm not sure why I have to specify that. And then finally, I'll say flow rule manager dot load rules collections dot singleton list fr. All right, there's my simple rule. Okay, so there's my simple rule. All we've done thus far is explicitly protect code. So let's see what happens if we start this application up right now. Okay, it's up and running. Localhost 8080/code. So there you go. If I overwhelm it, it says there's Nonghao. But now if I wail on the keyboard a bit here, there we go. It says blocked by Sentinel flow limiting. Okay, so that means that we got the default white label sort of protection rejection endpoint thing. That's a little boring. We might want to have a little bit more control over that, and we can certainly do that. One way to do that is to use a property. You could say @get mapping error. Okay, string I guess we could do response entity. Okay, response error. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna say response entity dot you know, too many status, HTTP status, too many requests. Dot content type is what do we want this to be? We want it to be media type application JSON dot value dot content. Body will be body collections dot singleton map error couldn't take it anymore. Okay, and then send that back. So there's our error endpoint. Let's see if that works. In order for us to cancel this, I need to configure that to be the endpoint. So we do that by going to our properties, of course, and specifying the block page. So what's happening is that when we call this endpoint too many times, it's going to send the user to that block page, and we're going to send them there. Now, you could, by the way, this is all being done through aspect-oriented programming and AOP and, you know, integrations with Spring filters and all the right things, right? The integration here is seamless for Spring developers, but behind the scenes, underneath the hood, Sentinel is just, of course, an API. And first of all, let's see this working, right? Status equals 999. What did I do there? No explicit mapping for error. Content. Well, I feel like that could have gone better. Code. Let's see. Maybe this could be, maybe I assumed too much. String. All right, try that again. Application. Yeah, block page is equal to error. No explicit block page. This should be, am I doing something very wrong here? Let's see, HTTP, localhost, 8080/error. I feel like that should be obvious. Get mapping, error, right? Looks okay to me. That is so weird. It's saying no explicit endpoint for error. Well, block page. Same thing. Does it have to be a post? I mean, what's the deal here? Request mapping. That should be, that I would swear that has worked before, but you know, what do I know? So Spring Cloud Starter, great, we got that. Spring Boot Starter test, Sentinel. Ah. Well, that looks like an issue, doesn't it, my friends? We are dealing with something here that I don't understand. Eek. Let's just try something simple like eek, because I feel like I get mapping. I know I've seen this before. And eek. Huh. It occurs to me that might be interfering with the generic Spring Boot sort of white label page code. There we go. So that was right. So now, I guess error is the issue. That the Spring Boot error page got in the way. Basically, I was interfering. So let's try this again now. Response entity, return response entity dot status, HTTP status dot 2 minute request dot content type equals media type application JSON value, and then body is going to be a single object that will turn into a JSON structure. Error. Can't take it anymore. Okay, there we are. That's our build, and we can try this again. /eq. Okay, so we go here. Oops, localhost code. Okay, there. So there's my application JSON UTF-8 value. So you can do whatever you want to do there, right? You have full control. This is one way to do it, is if you want to handle it like this. Another is if you want a more generic sort of object-oriented thing, a callback interface. There's a thing called a flow, what is it called? A URL block handler. So let's do that. We can create a custom URL block handler. URL block handler. Implement URL block handler. Implement these methods. And, you know, we're just going to log, I guess, the information here. I quite prefer that first mechanism, but this might be more interesting to you, and that's why I show it to you. So it's just a regular Spring Bean. You don't even have to do anything else to make Spring and Sentinel aware of it. So here's the request, response, and BE. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to get access to the response, res dot get the writer. And we're going to send a crying emoji. Okay, and that's it. That's my boring is all get out URL block handler, custom URL block handler bean. All right, now take 2. There we go. So if I trip that one, I get this information as well. Okay, so that's one way to do it, is to use code like I've done here, to use code and then and so on. You can also configure these flow rules using the Sentinel dashboard itself. Now the Sentinel dashboard doesn't persist that information unless you ask it to, and there's a way to do it, and I'll allude to it in a bit, but it doesn't have any state in of itself. And so in order for you to you know, when you use it, keep in mind that it won't be durable across restarts. So you have to then, you know, either persist it durably somewhere or just keep reconfiguring it. But for now, since it's a demo and I don't want to complicate matters too much, we'll just leave it as is. Okay. Okay. Now, so what we're going to do is we have Sentinel up and running, and we want to configure. You know, we've told it to configure itself, so we've told it to our application to register. The application's now here, and the only reason it's here, by the way, if you run this program, if you run the code and you start the code up, but you don't hit one of these endpoints, this won't register, right? You have to actually hit through the filter one of the endpoints that Sentinel is protecting for Sentinel to sort of lazily materialize the client instance here in the dashboard. So here's the instance of Bootiful Alibaba. I can hit monitoring. There's no sort of interesting endpoint there. Here's my resource chains. So if I go here, you know, we don't really get much out of this at the moment. If I go here, I can see that we have a code endpoint, right? And I want to also see the dashboard endpoint. And right now, there's no rules. You can see it just says ni hao, right? No problems there. So now, go back here, and as soon as I do that, you can see it says dashboard, right? And if I click on this now, suddenly, code and favicon and dashboard both have their graphs. So it takes a little bit, they're a little sort of asynchronous, aren't they? So we have the timestamp, we have the past queries per second, and the blocked queries per second, right? Showing me how much, you know, has gotten through and not gone through, and I can, you know, very, very nice, fast, reactive graphs showing me everything that's fit to print, so to speak. The user interface is pretty slick. It's fast. It's obviously I had to, you know, what I've understood is that this, you know, at any given time there could be thousands of nodes in this graph, in this tool. So you have the ability to search for nodes, search for services, and then get the details there. What I want to do is I want to configure. So I mean, you can see there's a lot of different rules here. I can see that I've got a node here running this version of Sentinel. The status of the application is healthy. Here's the IP address. It's on my local machine. Here's the heartbeat timestamp, the last one for this particular node. You can see all that. You can see the resource chains, right? You can see this is a hierarchical tree-like view, but you can do a list view as well. And what I want to do is I want to configure for dashboard a flow rule. So I click on the plus sign there, and I'm going to say queries per second. I'm going to limit that also to 2. Okay. So keep in mind what this is going to do is it's going to talk to our application and set up this rule. But that rule will die as soon as we restart the application. So unless we persist that somewhere. Okay. Add, then continue. So now I've just added the flow rule to dashboard, right? And so if we go here now, we get the same behavior that wasn't in place before, right? There was no flow rule applied to /dashboard before, but our configuration, our Spring Cloud configuration applies to either rules configured in the dashboard or to rules configured in Java code. Okay, and so again, now you get the visibility of things that, you know, the queries that were successful versus those that were blocked. You can see the information about that and all that. So that's really interesting. I think this is all pretty interesting. There's a whole lot of really interesting things that we could do beyond what I've shown you here, obviously. But we'll have to leave it at that. I did mention that we could store configuration for Sentinel somewhere durable. Well, one place we could store that is in Nacos, right? Nacos is a naming and configuration server. Get it? Naming, cos, configuration server, right? So Nacos is a naming configuration server. I've got that on my local machine here. Here we go. Run, start, and this one, Nacos, by default, starts up at 8848. And I was told a story by one of my friends at Alibaba that it's 8848 because apparently that's the height of Mount Everest. So in meters, is it? Yeah, there we go, 8848. So I think that's pretty cool, right? That's really cool. So the height of Mount Everest is 8848, and that's what the port of Nacos is. Okay, so Nacos is both a service registry, as you might have understood it in previous discussions when we talked about, for example, Apache Zookeeper or HashiCorp Console or Netflix Eureka or whatever. It's also a configuration server like the Spring Cloud config server, and in the way that Console or Zookeeper can be used as centralized configuration servers, or that Google Cloud Runtime config can be used as a configuration server, right? So these both plug into the appropriate abstractions in Spring Cloud. For the service registration and discovery support, you use the Spring Cloud Discovery Client abstraction, and it supports ribbon and client-side load balancing and all that. And for configuration, well, it's of course a property source that talks to some sort of backend, right? So just plugging into well-known SPIs and you get consistency. Now you can swap out your choice of configuration server backend with impunity, right? You can do it. You can go to Google Cloud to config server to Nacos, and your code in Java stays the same. So let's see what that looks like. Let's say that I wanted to participate in service registration and discovery, right? I've got the dependency there. This might be the old instance of it. I'm not sure. Let's see, details. Edit this service. Okay, there's an example of a thing that's not quite yet translated, but we don't need to worry about it anyway. So there you go. We've got that. We've got the service registration, discovery support, and configuration. So I guess the first thing we want to do is take advantage of service registration and discovery, just to demonstrate the point, because I fear that I may have lingering artifacts from a previous run. I'm going to switch the name here. I'll name this to be. We're going to call this just, a Bootiful Alibaba client, okay? Very long-winded, but it does give us what we want to do. It shows us what we do. Now, they haven't yet refactored the code such that you wouldn't need @enable discovery client. So if you've been using Spring Cloud for more than a year, you might remember that in the first, the very large majority of Spring Cloud's life, you had to use the discovery client annotation. You have to say @enable discovery client, and then in more recent releases, we've since dropped that requirement by opting in. You are considered to have opted in by having the dependency on the class path, and that is enough in most cases. But for now, for Nacos, that's not quite true. So you need @enable discovery client, and then we'll restart. Okay, now, will that work? Let's find out. I don't think so. Service management, not so much. So what we need to do is we need to tell our code where to find Nacos, and that's done, of course, through some properties that we store here in bootstrap.properties. So we want Nacos config server. I guess we need the dependency first, don't we? Here we go. Let's just bring in both dependencies. That explains why we didn't get very far at all. So we say Nacos equals localhost 8848. We're going to say Nacos server. Come on. Config. Okay, Nacos. And this will be config server address. Okay, and like that. Good. So there's our configuration for Nacos. What else do we need? I guess that's it. That's enough to tell it where to find our registry. So let's go ahead and restart, and then we've got this long-winded but unique name now. All right, so it's up and running. It's now connected to Nacos. So let's see. There we are, a Bootiful Alibaba client. Great, we have one healthy instance count, right? There it is. And we can draw configuration. Now I have no configuration yet, but we can get that. So let's first of all, let me inject the discovery client here, and we'll demonstrate what that looks like. So let's use the discovery client listener. Let me an event listener. Application ready event. Public void. Use discovery client. Okay, let's just demonstrate what that looks like. So this will be a very simple thing. Discovery client. Okay. This dot discovery client dot get instances, and well, let's just get the service names. There you go. Let's get services dot for each, and I'm going to just log out each service name as I see it. And voila. All right. There's my updated code, injecting the discovery client. Okay, and you can see when it starts up, it says Bootiful Alibaba, a Bootiful Alibaba client and client. All right, there we go. There's our service instances and so on. That's working as you'd expect, and all the rest applies as well. You could do client-side load balancing for routes if you wanted to do that. For example, you could say @load balanced on your REST template, and that would do the right thing there, and so on. Okay. Now for configuration, well, configuration is kind of interesting. We can store configuration in Nacos, and when I say configuration, I mean configuration files, and we can change them just like you would with config server. And I think this is actually in some ways a little bit more slick than the config server. So let's try it out. Okay, we're going to create a file called what is our Spring application name? go to Bootstrap. Here, I'm going to create this property file, .properties, okay? And we're going to call it a property file, properties for resolution of Spring Cloud, Ali Cloud, auth, key, and secret. Okay. Now, you can store YAML, HTML, text, right? And this would be good for if you wanted to. I guess we could plug in a image banner resolver somehow that loaded from here, for example, because now that there's this API. But for our purposes, to get it to do what we expect it to do, for the purposes of properties, we can store properties. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, first of all, I'm going to start up on port 8081 instead of 8080, just to prove that's working. And then I want to have some configuration so that I can find Ali Cloud. I want to authenticate. Now, of course, obviously, by the time this video is done and aired, I will have long since deleted these credentials. So not that any of you would ever go after my my credentials, but just so you know. Okay, so there's the key, Ali Cloud key, and whoops, secret. Okay, so that's my key and secret, and I'm going to use that in my application. So these are just going to be two properties that are, and I could also do things like server.port equals 0, right? All that configuration that I would normally store in my property files, in my application.properties, all of that would live here actually, most conveniently. But for now, since I have auto completion in my IDE and I want to be able to see the stuff working, we'll go ahead and we'll leave it there. But we want to keep the distinguishing stuff, the stuff that I want to be centralized and kept outside of Git. I want that to be here. Okay, so I'll hit publish. It says I've created the configuration. Why it's in red, which is kind of like, my blood pressure spikes just a hair every time I see red fonts in a dialog because it tells me something's wrong. But why that's in red, and yeah, there's a nice satisfying green checkbox. Not quite sure. We'll hit OK, and we can go back now. Now keep in mind we can see the historical versions. If we go here, this is called, the data ID is called a Bootiful client, a Bootiful Alibaba client .properties, and we have nothing yet. But if I go back and change this value again, so hit edit and message equals ni hao, okay, or greeting, publish, so I can see the delta, right, the current value. That's very convenient. And we go back here, and let's see, listening query. Oh, I have to do the group as well, don't I? And the group is default group, isn't it? Come on, default group, capital letters, and this. So we go here, okay, there we go. And so we can see, once you've been very specific, you've got to make sure not to fat finger that group value there. Once you've done that, you're given the sort of historical sequence of the values, right? And this is sort of like what you get when you have Git in the Spring Cloud config server, but it's just nice to have it more sort of like front and center. You can explicitly roll back to this particular configuration set. You can see the details. You can do all sorts of. You can see that it's an insert thing and whatever. Okay, very interesting. Now we have our configuration. We haven't even used it yet. So let's get back to using it. In our config, we want to connect to Ali Cloud. Okay, so let's go back to our pom.xml, and we're bringing the object storage service out of the bits there, and we're going to say secret Ali Cloud secret key, and I think I called it Ali Cloud secret, and access key. Okay, and I called it, what did I call it? Come on. details. It is AliCloud secret and AliCloud. Oh, that doesn't help at all. It's called key and then secret. Hopefully that's representative of what we need. So AliCloud key, AliCloud secret. Very cool. So we've got that now. And of course, in order to talk to AliCloud, I will need to give it a region. And that region will be the, it's going to be where we find our, which version of AliCloud are we using, right? So we're going to go back to here, and I'm going to say OSS endpoint. I'm going to point it to HTTP OSS US West 1.aliunxa.com. Okay, I think that's it. Aliun. There you go. I think that's the code there. US West something. Okay. There we go. That's the configuration now to connect to Alibaba Cloud. So we're using Nacos to do service registration and discovery, and we're using it now to store configuration, including credentials, things that I don't want laying around in my code, especially in Git, available for the world to see. And now I can use AliCloud. Let's do that. We've got the configuration for connectivity and for authentication all set up. Let's go ahead and write some code that uses the object storage service, which is sort of like S3, but it's in AliCloud. Okay, so component cloud OSS listener at event listener application ready event dot class public void, and then what I want to do is I want to use OSS. Okay, so we'll say a throws exception private final OSS, and inject this into the constructor. And I'm not going to do anything too fancy here. I'm going to create a bucket. I'm going to upload a photo. I've got a photo. You know what photo I've got? I've got a photo of a kitty cat, because cats are great. So here we go. So desktop, let's see, open desktop kitty. Okay, there we go. Cutest kitty ever. Well, at least the cutest kitty on this screen, because they're all cute. Now I'm gonna copy that kitty, desktop kitty cat, to my downloads directory, reservation server, Bootiful Alibaba, source, main, resources, kitty.jpg. That way it's in the class path and I don't have to work too hard to get it. I'll just tell Spring to inject it. Now obviously you could do file upload. You could do multi-part file form upload with Spring MVC or Spring Web Flux. These are super easy things to do. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to say to use this one. Okay, so we'll say, no, we want to use class path, and it's going to be called kitty.jpg. And we'll tell Spring to provide a pointer to a resource. Resource kitty. Okay, and I'm going to store that as well. Private final resource. Add that into the constructor arguments. And somehow it got two arguments when I wanted one, but it doesn't matter. We can fix that easily. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to say this dot OSS dot. We could check if it has a, if there's a bucket or anything like that. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to say create a bucket. Bootiful Alibaba Spring tip. Okay. That'll give us a value, a bucket, and then in the bucket we're going to put an object using OSS. So this dot OSS put object, and it'll be bucket dot get name kitty dot jpg, and we'll give it a pointer to the file. So I guess resource dot get file, is that right? We can give it a file. We can give it an input stream. So even better, give it an input stream. That's more generic. Okay, now before we do this, before we run this, let's take a look at AliCloud. So I've got AliCloud. I've got an AliCloud account here. Let's log into my Aliun console. Aliun is AliCloud. Okay, these are back and forth in the literature. Ooh. Doesn't quite work, does it? Because there's this weirdness with the login. Okay. Go. Sign in. JFKY. So now you can see that they have a vast assortment of services. You can click on this. You can see all the cool stuff that they've got here. A lot of which is supported in Spring Cloud Alibaba. But we are using OSS, and that is, where did I put it? Object and Storage Service. Click on that. Why does this keep dimming my computer? Now we'll see that we've got, at the moment, I've got one bucket called Key Bucket here, called Bootiful Alibaba Spring Tip Bucket. It's a bit long. Okay, so there you go. Well, whatever, we got that. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this code one more time. This time it should connect successfully. It should authenticate with Ali Cloud, and I should be able to use automatically through the auto-configured client some of the interesting services, the compelling services in Ali Cloud. Alrighty, let's see what we got. Refresh. Is that refresh? There we go. Bootiful Alibaba Spring Tip Bucket. And if I look at the files, open this up. There we go. How about that, huh? So with that, my friends, we looked at and you can even see the URL by which this kitty cat would be accessible if you wanted it to be. Looked at how to use some of Alibaba's really interesting stuff with Spring and Spring Cloud and Spring Boot. We did not get to look at Rocket MQ. We'll do that next time, I hope. And we didn't get to look at Double, which is a service framework, which is in a whole other opera, and we'll get into that one as well. That's a good one too. But we did get to look at a lot of really compelling things here, and I love that there's so much good open source stuff coming from the Alibaba team, and they're keen on making this stuff generally available, and they want to share. They're out there turning their documentation into English and making it as accessible as possible for those of us who don't speak the language. And I really appreciate it, and I hope you will as well. These technologies were born of scale demands that very few people have. Right? There's just nobody that really can talk about this kind of scale except save for perhaps Google or Facebook. I mean, these are insane levels of scale, and so they built things that they don't have to share with us, and I'm sure Google and Facebook have had to solve similar problems. Netflix, they also solve similar problems. Netflix did the world a big favor when they open sourced a lot of the sort of internal machinery that allowed them to scale to the lengths that they did, the heights that they did. So in the same vein, I think we have a very interesting opportunity to learn from the proverbial giants and literal and actual giants of the cloud like Alibaba. So, thank you so much. And with that, my friends, we'll see you next time.